Candidates for Clark County District Attorney. I'm Lisa Mosley, and I will be serving as your moderator tonight in my role as the chair of the Law Enforcement and Judicial Committee for the Clark County Black Caucus. Hello, everyone. This event is open to the public via live streaming. We ask that our candidates and our panelists be respectful, maintain a respectful environment, and that you all not speak over each other. The virtual audience watching, you will have an opportunity to ask questions of the candidates. I ask that if you're watching and you have questions, please submit your questions now in the chat box. And we have a fabulous technical team from the ACLU consisting of Wesley and Jordan, who is going to be holding it down in our tech tonight, and they will be taking your questions. I'd like to move to introducing our sponsors for tonight, the ACLU of Las Vegas, the Clark County Black Caucus, the NAACP, and Go Urban Las Vegas, whose logos you can see behind me. I will now introduce our panelists. I'm sorry, I want to introduce our panelists. But before I do that, all of you have heard by now that one of our candidates withdrew from our forum tonight. So from the Clark County Black Caucus, we have the lovely Miss Yvette Williams, who is the chair, who is going to be reading a statement and a press release. Miss Yvette, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley, and to all the candidates that attended tonight. We appreciate you being here tonight. On behalf of all of our sponsors and our collaboration for the March Madness series, the release was sent out that says, and I'm just going to read verbatim, the Clark County Black Caucus, NAACP Las Vegas, the ACLU of Nevada, and the GoUrbanLasVegas.com joined forces to engage and educate Southern Nevada voters about this year's election. The final event of the March Madness series will occur at 6 p.m. Thursday and will broadcast on Facebook and YouTube. Candidates Ozzie Fumo and Timothy Treffinger will appear live from an undisclosed studio location. The event, originally scheduled to be in person, was moved to a secure virtual location at the request of incumbent District Attorney Steve Wolfson. Despite accommodating this request and several others as encompassed in an email outlining the terms of Wolfson's participation weeks ago, Wolfson dropped out of the event this week, with his campaign team stating that all questions needed to be submitted in advance and that, quote, questions from the virtual audience is out of the question, unquote, although this was previously agreed upon by Mr. Wolfson. Clark County Black Caucus Chair Yvette Williams said, honestly, I'm shocked. Although we may not always agree, Mr. Wolfson has always honored his word to me until now. I'm old school. I take people at their word and believe a person is only as good as their word. After personally meeting with him in the fall of 2021, Mr. Wolfson agreed to participate in a forum during the upcoming election cycle. Although it has been difficult, we rose to the challenge of ensuring that our community would hear from all candidates running for this very important seat and created a platform where Mr. Wolfson said he felt safe to participate, unlike the other candidates who did not ask for any special consideration to participate. To break his promise at this late date is disrespectful to our organization, our partner organizations, and to the entire community. In fact, it is inexcusable. NAACP Las Vegas President Roxanne McCoy said, the district attorney is a publicly elected position representing the community. As taxpayers, Mr. Wolfson has an obligation to engage with those that pay his salary, especially during an election cycle where he's asking to be reelected. I personally find it disrespectful that he doesn't feel he should engage with the black community and suggests he feels unsafe. He should judge a person by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. We've gone out of our way to accommodate him and meet his request. Mr. Wolfson's disrespect for our entire black community is concerning to us all. ACLU of Nevada Executive Director Attar Hezbollah said, the best part of our collaboration on this series of candidate forums has been the way it increased access to political candidates for folks who may not have had a chance to engage otherwise. It is incredibly disappointing to see Mr. Wolfson refusing to participate in a forum hosted by organizations devoted to civil rights and to communities of color after he made a commitment to do so, and our organizations respectively accommodated some really absurd requests, including moving the forum to a confidential location with only a virtual audience to ensure his participation. I am mostly confused as to why someone would be seeking public office if they want to avoid the public entirely. And that is on behalf of all of our organizations. And I now turn this back over to our very competent and beautiful Lisa Mosley.
Thank you, Yvette, and thank you for those lovely comments. We are really sad that Mr. Wolfson withdrew, but we do have two fabulous candidates with us tonight. Before we get to them, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists. Joining us from the ACLU will be Mr. Anthony Curry. And joining us representing the NAACP is the one and only Pastor Kelsey West. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Now, I know you all are waiting to meet these candidates and hear what they have to say. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us why you want to be district attorney. And I think, Mr. Treffinger, since you're new to this game, we're going to start with you. Tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Right into the fire. I appreciate that.
Right into the fire. That's what I do.
My name's Tim Treffinger. I'm the Republican candidate for district attorney. I'm the only Republican in the race at this point. And I want to be your district attorney because I want to bring a conservative voice to the office. I think it's important to have balance and consistency in prosecuting cases and in dealing with the other issues that the district attorney's office deals with. And there's been a lack of that for the past 8 years. There's been very little consistency. There's been some very absurd discharging decisions coming from the defense side of the table. I'm a former prosecutor. I started my career in Story County, Nevada. I went to the AG's office and then eventually went into private practice. And I'm here to be the conservative voice and bring consistency to this fight.
Thank you so much. To my left and your right, Mr. Ozzie Fumo.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you guys for hosting this event, the NAACP, the Black Caucus, ACLU. We jumped through a lot of hoops. I accepted every condition that District Attorney Wolfson wanted in this campaign, and I think John Ralston said it best when it's absolutely pathetic that he didn't want to show up here today. I'm not even sure why he ran as a Democrat, because he caters mainly to his Republican constituents. But I want to start off by saying I want to get in this race because I want to make Nevada and Clark County especially a safer and better place for our community. I think the district attorney's office has great support staff, great paralegals, great attorneys. They just have lousy leadership. There's no diversity in that office. There's mismanagement of cases, there's mismanagement of staff, and there's a mismanagement of justice. 10 years ago, when attorney Steve Wolfson was appointed to be Clark County District Attorney, he had a support staff member named Audrey Locke on his team. She stole $42,000 from his campaign. Then he took her into the district attorney's office, and she stole from the district attorney's office. You remember when CC's Pizza, the two officers were fouled at CC's Pizza? District attorney's office had bake sales and T-shirt sales to bring money to this community to help those injured officers' families, and she stole that money too. Did he terminate her? No. In fact, he's on record saying she's the best employee I've ever had.
Can I interrupt you for just a
Sure.
moment? And I understand Mr. Wolfson is a candidate for this office. He's actually the sitting district attorney. I would like to just get you to focus on telling the audience who you are, and we may have some opportunity a little later
Definitely.
to talk about that. I don't want to disparage anyone else. Ms. Locke is not running for district
She
attorney.
is absolutely not.
So
but
I want to just
it's
make
his-
sure that we keep it clean, keep it nice, and
I-
just kind of focus on the questions and let everybody know who you are and why you're running.
And I'm running because of mismanagement like that. He has a problem with people of color. He doesn't want you in his office, he doesn't want you on juries, and he doesn't want you on the bench. In fact, when the Honorable Erica Ballou won her seat in 2020, he's on record of saying, I don't even know why she won this seat because she didn't raise any money, because he thinks it's all about raising money and not the most important candidate for the job. I feel I am the most important candidate for this job. He's on record saying that she shouldn't even be there and we need to appoint judges. And I think that was a disparaging comment, not only against the Honorable Erica Ballou, but against black women in general. We have one justice of the peace, black woman named Karen Bennett Herron, and he has a history of taking her cases from the grand jury or to the grand jury from her courtroom. There's a joke in the RJC that there's a conga line from her courtroom to the grand jury's office. That's going to change. That's why I'm running for this seat. There's a mismanagement of the jail. It costs us in this community $380 million to run these jails. It has risen $75 million under Steve Wolfson's leadership. That is going to change. The Clark County Detention Center was not built to be a mental health hospital or a homeless shelter. It was built to house people pre-trial. It costs us $200 a day to warehouse people. I am going to change that because I am going to treat medical condition as a drug addiction as a medical condition. I am going to treat the homeless with dignity and respect. We're not going to warehouse them under my administration.
All right. Thank you so much for that. We're ready to rumble in here. Gentlemen, each of you will have questions from our panelists, Mr. Curry and Pastor Kelsey West. Each of you will have 3 minutes each to answer those questions. We ask that you stick to that 3-minute time, and if time allows, we may be able to return to that question and revisit, or if time allows, we may be able to give you both a little bit more time. To my panelists, are y'all ready? Well, get ready, but I'm going to start with the first question. And since I started with you introductions, Mr. Fumo, I'm gonna get to you. Why do you want to be district attorney? And tell us what in the first 100 days should you be elected to district attorney? What are you going to do? What is your 100-day plan? And what is it that you're going to do on day one coming into the district attorney's office should you be elected?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is end the death penalty in this state. And I know we're going to get to that later. The immediate thing I'm going to do, too, is go on a listening tour. I'm going to listen to the staff. I'm going to listen to the attorneys in that office about the things that have gone wrong and the things they want to change. I am going to be out in the community. I am not afraid to be out in the community. I am not afraid to talk to people in this community. I am not afraid to listen. And there's going to be transparency in that office. I am going to turn over the records. I am going to turn over the video clips. As we get them, the people will get them. If I'm legally allowed to do so, they will be turned over. In addition, I will be accountable. And I don't think that's something the current district attorneys can do. And when talking about being accountable is admitting when you're wrong. And I just want to say something real quick because I have to admit a mistake that I made earlier in this campaign. I made a rash comment on a Twitter feed about the UFC boxer when the charges were dropped against him. I admit I did not read the entire article. I did not hear both sides of the case. And Attorney David Figler and Maggie McCletcher are excellent attorneys in this situation. And they pointed out in the district police that we did not have felony-worthy charges in this case, and that's why they were dropped. I will listen, I will be accountable, and I will admit when I was wrong. And in that situation, I was wrong. And so I commit to you, I apologize, and I commit to you that I will listen. And when I am wrong, we will correct those mistakes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We certainly do need in elected office people who are going to be accountable for their comments and for their actions and be able to admit when they're wrong. Mr. Treffinger, tell us why do you want to be district attorney, and tell us what you will do in your day one coming in, and what is your 100-day plan for the district attorney's office should you be elected?
Absolutely. So I want to be in this office. I want to make our communities a safer place. I do want to bring transparency and accountability to the office. I agree with Mr. Fumo. It's incredibly important to the Office of District Attorney. This should not be something shrouded in secrecy. That's what makes people not trust law enforcement, not trust their elected officials. I'll tell you one thing I'm going to do on day one. I'm going to pick up a file and I'm going to go down into court. And I think that's something else that's been missing from the current administration. If you're not on the front line with your deputies, if you don't see how your policies are being enforced, you have no control of the office. And right now we do have an incumbent who I don't believe has picked up a file in his entire time he's been in office. I think that's a problem. I think the jail does need to be looked at. I think even defense attorneys' access to clients needs to be looked at. That's been stripped down over the past few years. It's made criminal defense incredibly difficult. And there should be a level playing field. The district attorney is supposed to prosecute crimes without passion or prejudice. He's not supposed to stack the deck just so he can win cases and have a big conviction rate. Those are things that need to be looked at. And then the consistency and equality of charging decisions. Every case is different. Every person is different. But what does not need to be taken into account is the person's race or gender. It should go to criminal history. It should go to the facts of the case. And those are the things that I'm going to look at to make policy changes so that there is consistency and equality in the office.
Okay, you heard it here. Panelists, are you ready?
We are.
Take it away.
Good evening, gentlemen, and thank you for being here. I'm going to direct this question first to you, Mr. Treffinger. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, since 1973, 186 individuals in America have been found innocent after previously being sentenced to death. This includes 2 Nevadans, Roberto Miranda in 1996 and Paul Browning in 2020. Furthermore, the death penalty is imposed disproportionately on people of color. 55% of current death row inmates are black or of black or Latin heritage. What is your position on the death penalty, and explain why you feel that way?
Thank you for the question. I don't think it's going to surprise anyone as the Republican in the race that I am in favor of keeping the death penalty on the books in Nevada. I do have an issue with the way that it is instituted, and I think that leads to those disparate numbers that you just talked about. If you have consistency in charging decisions, if you are carefully looking at every case, and you are consistently applying the law, you should not have those changes in statistics. I absolutely agree with you. The death penalty is a tool, though. It's a tool for the worst of the worst cases. I don't think you'd find too many people who think that if Mr. Paddock from the Route 91 shooting had survived, that his case wouldn't have been a prime case for the death penalty. But that's a very specific, egregious case. It is not for every murder case. It is not for every charging decision. Just because someone's dead doesn't mean you institute the death penalty. If you closely look at those cases, and I personally would review all of those cases, I would keep the death penalty review panel, so I'm not the only voice in the room, because I make mistakes just like everybody else. But I do believe it is a tool that we can continue to use, and I will make sure that it is not disproportionately used on minorities.
May I jump in, gentlemen? Mr. Treffinger, you said you support the death penalty, not currently the way it's instituted. Should you be elected to district attorney, what would you do to ensure that people who are in fact innocent are not sentenced to death? What would you do to change the institution, as you mentioned?
So part of that is a partnership with law enforcement. In my opinion, there hasn't been a great training relationship between the DA's office and Metropolitan Police Department. If you are actively training law enforcement and giving them education on how to properly investigate cases and how to properly bring those cases to the district attorney's office, you'll see less innocent people being prosecuted. I can tell you that back in the AG's office, I covered 3 counties. I did all the Domestic Violence and Violence Against Women Act cases. Part of that role was training law enforcement, because when I got into the office, we had a boatload of problems with investigation. And the cleaner the investigation is, making sure officers are accountable, and making sure that my deputies are accountable, the cleaner the process will be, and that's what needs to change.
The suggestion for the death penalty doesn't come from law enforcement. That comes from the district attorney's office. The district attorney is the one who recommends the death penalty in certain cases. So what would you do at that level to make sure that innocent black men, black women, Latino, and folks who are innocent are not being sentenced to death?
And that's where the review comes in. And that's when I reference the training, it's so that I know that the facts that I'm getting, or the alleged facts from law enforcement, are the best facts, so I can have a full view of the situation. That's what's most important. You need to have all the facts, clean facts. You don't need officers exaggerating or doing things to muddy up the situation. And that's where the review comes in. And that's why I would personally touch every case. No case is going to be recommended to death without my review.
Gentlemen, I apologize. I get passionate sometimes about these answers, and I want to jump in. I will give it back to you, Mr. West, to ask your question.
No problem, and good evening. I'm going to direct this question to Mr. Fumo. Will you commit to release annual transparency reports detailing how many times your office issued surveillance demands on companies or applied for warrants or other court orders to conduct electronic surveillance? Please explain your position.
And the answer to that question is absolutely yes. I am all about accountability and transparency, and we will do that on day one. Like I said, if we have the records and they're available to the public and legally I can turn them over, we will do so. I would like to address the death penalty question, if I may.
Sure.
Okay. I am opposed to the death penalty. I think you all know that about my history. We get it wrong, and it's disproportionately filed against men of color. In fact, the darker your skin, the more likely you are to get the death penalty imposed against you. And we get it wrong, and we get it wrong a lot. 1 in 8.3 capital cases are overturned where the person is actually innocent, whether through DNA or other evidence. We get it wrong. And if I may, I had 2 cases in February. I'm a trial attorney. One of the things I agree with Mr. Treffinger on is Steve doesn't pick up files. I did 2 murder cases in the month of February. Both were black men. Both the district attorney wanted to kill. They took them to what's called the Death Review Committee. The Death Review Committee then decides whether they're going to file or not. Fortunately, they didn't. But after a jury trial, a 2-week jury trial on February 14th that ended 2 weeks later, a jury of this man's peers found him not guilty. We get it wrong. When the jury heard all of the facts, both sides of the story, because the police ran with just one, they found the man innocent, and he's getting to go home now. We get it wrong. The second one, I finished that case on a Thursday. Monday, I was back in court picking a jury on another murder case. This man for a year had been saying the same thing. It was self-defense. Yes, I did, but it was self-defense. After a 1-week jury trial, the jury came back and found him. They were hung, but at one point they were 11-1 for not guilty and ended up being 10-2 because one of the jurors got ill, couldn't participate, and they brought another one. We get it wrong, and that is going to change day one, because I have practiced capital murder cases. The worst thing for them is they don't want to spend the rest of their life in custody. That is the worst punishment to them, and that is what we will do. Day one, that will stop. And it'll save lives because we will stop killing innocent black men, and it will save this county millions of dollars.
Thank you. Next question from our panelists.
Thank you. There are many nonviolent and low-level misdemeanors still on the books. What, if any, would you support reducing to a civil citation if they came before the Nevada legislature as a bill draft? Please be as specific as possible, and I'll start with you on this one, Mr. Fumo.
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, you guys know my history of being a legislator and the things that I've tried to get rid of, the cash bail, the death penalty, things like that. But you're absolutely right. We have these low-level, nonviolent, first-time offenders, low-level drug cases, misuse of a park bench. There's certain silly crimes that we are not going to prosecute. I was so happy that the legislature in this last session said we're going to get rid of traffic tickets as a criminal offense. Those are ridiculous. And what it does is it keeps the disenfranchised, the poor stay poor because they can't afford these tickets and the fines are reinstituted. That kind of silliness and irresponsible behavior will stop.
I would like to follow up. Sorry to follow up. You mentioned the legislation that decriminalized minor traffic violations. You may be aware that there are some efforts. There's some talk about people being able to maybe speed, rack up many speeding tickets with no accountability. That the only issue is the only thing that would happen to them is they would get a ding on your credit. So, as district attorney, and I know you don't make the laws as district attorney, but would you support keeping the, minor traffic violations decriminalized with the efforts to roll that legislation back? As district attorney, would you support that?
Yes, I would keep that, yes.
Mr.
Absolutely.
Treffinger?
I agree. I think traffic infractions should be civil. I think throwing people in jail because they can't pay a traffic ticket is ridiculous. We have a debtor's prison system almost going on, and that's just traffic tickets can be civil. It's not just a civil infraction. It's not just on their credit. It's going to impact their insurance. It's going to impact other things. Let DMV handle that. Let's not throw these people in jail.
We also know that with the barriers removed to payment, things like a ability to pay assessment, payment plans that are reasonable, that people can actually afford, community service that people can actually do, that collection rates actually go up and people actually do pay their tickets. And so I'm glad to hear that both of you gentlemen would support that legislation and those traffic violations staying civil versus criminal. Mr. West, your next question.
Mr. Treffinger, this time I'll start with you.
Sure.
All righty? And it's a little lengthy, so I want to make sure you get all of it. The pretrial proportion of the jail population was 67% in 2017, with 7.9% remaining in custody for more than 1 year. In Clark County alone, 50 people held at the Clark County Detention Center have been jailed for at least 5 years. These current pretrial detention policies have disproportionately impacted low-income individuals of color. If elected, what are 3 reforms you can implement to address pretrial detention disparities? And will you commit to supporting bail reforms and favor release pending trial in all cases where the accused is not found to be a flight risk or in danger to the community?
Thank you for the question.
That was lengthy.
It was exactly as promised. I appreciate that.
Yes.
As far as things that need to be done with pretrial detention, 3 reforms. One thing is the consistency of charging decisions. You're seeing a lot of cases that are incredibly overcharged. We've had cases where, 1 pill per charge on a drug case turns a $5,000 bail into a $500,000 bail. If you're just going by the basic bail schedule before anyone gets into court, that's a problem. There's no reason to charge things that way, especially for low-level drug offenses. If it's a possession thing, if it's a trafficking issue, different story. But that's the first thing. Overcharging cases is a problem, and that's a law enforcement training issue because they're the ones booking people into the jail. Second thing is the consistency of charging decisions and bail recommendations at the justice court level. I would hold my deputies accountable. You need to make sure you're recommending the correct bail or release depending on flight risk and danger to the community. And that we do have the Valdez-Jimenez rules now where that's what's supposed to be taken into account, but there are cases where I hear people asking for detention and I completely disagree with that. Then again, there are some cases where you see someone who's charged with high-level offenses who somehow is out on an OR. There's no consistency with those decisions, and that's what's leading to those problems. I would commit to any bail reform that would allow for people to be released as long as they are not a flight risk and not a danger to the community. I do still believe cash bail is appropriate for some cases. Murder cases, high-level sex cases, sex trafficking cases, all major problems we have here in Clark County. Those people probably should not be out on the street, depending on the strength of the case. But I'm going to make sure that I am reviewing deputies' charging decisions. I'm going to review bail arguments and make sure that those things are being applied consistency to stop the disparate populations you're talking about.
Same question? Thank you very much. I hope everybody in the audience listening to this, watching this, Googles me. I spent 2 sessions at the Nevada State Legislature, and both sessions I hammered bills for bail reform in Nevada, as well as ending the death penalty. And I used to say to the legislators up there, to the poor, bail means jail, but to the rich, clout means you're out. It is applied disproportionately all over the country, but especially here in Clark County, and that's going to change. The first thing I'm going to do is educate my deputies on the Valdez-Jimenez decision, because I don't believe right now they're arguing correctly because they have lousy leadership. If someone is a flight risk, there can be conditions, non-monetary conditions applied, because we know exactly what the district attorney does. They pile on charges, they make their bail high, and then they get people to try to plead to something that they didn't do in order to just get out. And I can't tell you how many times that's happened. If you're a danger to the community, you shouldn't be let out. The judges have a responsibility to keep people in custody. They have a responsibility to protect this community. So if you're a danger, that is a problem. But if they're not a danger, and they have to be able to educated on how to argue that and articulate that to the judge. But if not, non-monetary conditions can be fashioned. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you're going to show up to court.
Thank you. I'd like to if you're just joining us, I'm Lisa Mosley. I am moderator for tonight's forum with our candidates, Mr. Ozzie Fumo and Mr. Timothy Treffinger. These gentlemen are running to replace Mr. Wolfson as district attorney. Joining us are our panelists, Anthony Curry from the ACLU and Pastor Kelsey West from representing the NAACP. You may continue with your questions.
Thank you. The Clark County DA's office does not currently track racial and gender statistics as they relate to charging decisions, bail recommendations, diversionary program placements, and plea bargains. What do you think this data, or why do you think this data is not being compiled, and how can any disparities be addressed if the data is not being tracked? And I'm going to start with Mr. Fumo.
It's not being compiled because the current district attorney has his head in the sand and he doesn't want to face the music. That's why it's not being compiled. And I promise you, day one, we will compile it. This isn't 1981 when Steve first passed the bar and he came to Nevada and computers were brand new. It's a click of a button. And it's stats that we already keep. The police, when they arrest people, have race, color, age. They have all that information in there already. It's already in the computer. It is just not being turned over. And let me tell you, it's being hidden from us. In 2013, the Nevada State Legislature requested a statewide study done on the arrest and the death penalty. And District Attorney Steve Wolfson failed. He refused to turn that information over to the state legislature. I will not do that. If I have the numbers and I'm legally allowed to turn them over, you will have them too. That's my commitment to you.
Same question.
Same question.
I agree. It's about transparency. If we can track these numbers, we should track these numbers. I don't think there's a reason why they're not being tracked right now, at least not a valid reason. And how can we address major issues if we're not tracking this information? I could sit here all day and say, you know, we can train the deputies so that there's not these disparities. However, how do you figure out which deputies have the problem if you're not tracking the information? It's about transparency, it's about accountability, and that we can certainly agree on. Absolutely.
If you're watching and you have questions, if you're watching live on Facebook or YouTube and you have a question that you'd like to submit for our candidates, we ask that you go ahead and put it in the chat feature right now, and we will get to your questions. You will all have an opportunity to have some of those questions answered once this panelists conclude their questions. Mr. West.
Yes, but before I ask my last question, Mr. Treffinger, as a member of the NAACP and the Black Caucus, we pride ourselves in not only providing a safe environment, but doing everything decent and in order. I asked a previous question, and I did not give you an opportunity to answer that one as well. So I'm going to ask you that one before I ask this one. Sure. Will you commit to release annual transparency reports detailing how many times your office issued surveillance demands on companies or applied for warrants or other court orders to conduct electronic surveillance, and explain your position.
Absolutely. So I think one thing we can all agree on is transparency is for everybody. It doesn't matter what your race, creed, political party is. If you're going to trust your elected officials, they need to be held accountable. And the only way to hold them accountable is to give this information out. So I'm absolutely for the transparency reports. I would commit to giving them out. And I think it would be an excellent way to bring trust back into the law enforcement community at the DA level.
Thank you. And now let me present my final question, and I'll start with you again. What is your position on no knock warrants? Do you support, oppose? Are you neutral? Their continuation under the current law, and or what should be changed? What is your position when it comes to the use of chokeholds? Did you agree with legislation passes to end the practice or not? Please expound on your position and why.
Okay. I'll start with the chokeholds. I think they're unnecessary. I think there's plenty of ways we can train our officers in dealing with these situations that don't involve a chokehold that can lead to an unnecessary and meaningless death. There's no room for that on the street. We can train our officers better, and I would commit to, I can tell you right now, if officers choose to use holds that cause death, I'm not going to hesitate to prosecute those people. They're as liable as anybody else, and they need to be held accountable for their actions. That being said, I do think it's a training issue. We need to get them away from that so we can avoid that issue in the future. As to no-knock warrants, I think it's similar to the death penalty. It's a tool in the toolbox, but it's one that's only for very specific purposes. Officer safety is a concern with some of these things. You do have people who are repeat violent offenders, or they do have evidence in investigation that have high levels of violence or destruction of evidence that could lead to prosecution. In those limited instances, I'm for them. I'm not for any individual off the street who has no record, who is a minor level drug case. I don't think we need to be sending SWAT teams into those homes to begin with. But I will do whatever I can to limit the use of no-knock warrants, and I'll use them in very specific circumstances.
Thank you.
Same question. to
Same
Mr. Fumo.
question, Mr. Fumo.
Let's take a moment and pause and say his name. Isaiah Williams. Isaiah Williams was a young man killed in Nevada on a no-knock warrant when the police weren't even searching for him. They make mistakes. I'm against no-knock warrants, and in this I'm in line with the PPA. When I was at the legislature, they testified. They are not in favor of no-knock warrants. Not only does it put the people in the home in danger, it puts the officers in danger.
Can you just say who the PPA is?
Police Protective Association. And they are against it as well because their lives are in danger. Because what happens when you blast into a place and you crash the windows and you knock down the door and a person is in his home, what is his first thing?
Defense.
Fight or flight. He's going to grab his gun to protect his home. He doesn't know who's coming in. And so it puts every officer's life in danger as well. And they're against it. They don't like it. There's no circumstance where that is going to be appropriate. The idea originally was to surprise people to keep officer safety, and it backfired. And too often officers are shot and killed at the same time. So I want to say his name again, Isaiah Williams. It happens here in Nevada. It makes mistakes, and I'm against it. Chokeholds, the same thing. And one thing we agree on is if a police officer in this county commits a murder on an individual, I will not hesitate to prosecute them. No more will they be protected by the district attorney's office. If they commit a crime, they're just as liable as everywhere else. And it's unfortunate that the state of Nevada is one of only 2 states in the country that has never prosecuted an officer for murder. And it's because the district attorney's office is in bed with the police officers. And that's going to change too. Because you arrest them, I'll prosecute them. We are 2 independent organizations.
All right. Mr. Curry?
In both of your responses, you brought up the idea of police accountability. Due to the design of our system, the district attorney's office and the police are partners in investigation and prosecution of crime. How will you, as district attorney, ensure that accountability is that prosecutions are equal? It's one thing to say that you're going to hold the police accountable, but what concrete steps will you take to make sure that the deputies in your office feel comfortable going forward with a prosecution against a police officer? And I'll start with you, Mr. Treffinger.
And again, I think that has to do with consistency and training and partnership between the agencies. They're absolutely separate agencies, but the investigation part, they need training from the DA's office. We're the ones applying the law. They make mistakes like everybody else, but if we can limit those mistakes, if we train them better, if we have an open dialogue with them, And I will counsel my deputies, look, if you have if a case is brought to you for screening that doesn't make sense, that looks like it's done for a racial reason or for any other improper reason, that case should be thrown out. And they will have the ability to do that. I'm not going to tie my deputies' hands and say, charge everything, overcharge everything. Let's get all these ridiculous plea deals. That's not justice. We're here to find justice, and it's just not happening right now. But those are the steps I would take.
Mr. Fumo?
First, I'd say that legally insufficient cases brought to my office by the Metropolitan Police Department will not be prosecuted. They will have to do their job and do it well. And if they make a mistake, I too will not hesitate to prosecute them. And one of the things also we agree on is the current district attorney, for the last 10 years he's in office, has failed this community. Not once has he picked up a file, walked into court, and tried a case. Prior to him, we had district attorneys like David Roger, who wasn't afraid to pick up a file and lead his troops into battle. We had Stuart Bell, who would pick up a file and lead his troops into battle. And I will commit to do that. And if it's an officer and no other district attorney wants to handle it, I will be the one leading the charge. You will see me in court arguing the bail, arguing the case, protecting this community.
Thank you.
I have a question. So I hear both of you, particularly you, Mr. Fumo, talk about you will be willing to charge officers, both of you. How will you get around the unions that protect the officers and the investigative process? We know that officers are involved in officer-involved shootings sometimes. They have an opportunity, they are put on administrative leave. They have an opportunity to talk with an attorney, and correct me if I'm wrong. They have an opportunity to get their story together and talk to someone before they're in the investigation. How does that impact whether officers are charged with any kind of crime when there's an officer-involved shooting, and how would you change that? Let's start with you.
Okay, so first thing, they do have their Garrity rights, and you're absolutely right. They don't have to talk to an investigator at the time. They get to go home, they get to discuss it with the other officers, they get to talk to an attorney, and then they get to give a statement. And when I was at the legislature, I thought, well, that's a great idea. Why don't we do that for everybody? Why don't we do that for juveniles? When juveniles are arraigned, why don't we call their parents and let their parents be in the room? Why don't we have the parents have an opportunity to call a defense attorney that can be in the room as well? They have rights that the rest of the citizens don't have. And it's going to make it difficult because of those rights. But I would support legislation to make that equal for everybody. Let everybody have the same rights. I understand officers put their lives on the line every single day,
They do.
but so do we in this community.
Officers do put their lives on the line every single day, and we're grateful for that.
We are.
We also just want accountability, and we want officers to be able to do their jobs
And we want
effectively.
equal justice
Equal
under the law.
justice, absolutely. Mr. Trevor, same question to you.
And it's true. I mean, the police do have rights that the rest of us don't have. But I will say this. There's nothing that stops the district attorney's office and its investigators from investigating the police to the best of their ability. The rights that they have in place right now, if that law changes, obviously I would be for more transparency there and limiting their ability to get their story straight, as you had said. But I would investigate those cases wholeheartedly. I would assign investigators. Go investigate this like any other murder case. We have detectives in the Metropolitan Police Department that can investigate a murder. Our investigators can investigate a murder, and we can bring those charges. It's just a matter of having the courage to do it, and I think both of us have that, frankly.
Do either of you support independent investigative bodies when there is an officer-involved shooting? We know that right now, those cases tend to go into IA. And some folks have said it's like the fox investigating himself when he's in the hen house. Do you support an independent investigative body to investigate those cases?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, that's one of the things that I will commit to do. We need is maybe an officer on that committee. We need a defense attorney on that committee. We need a prosecutor on the committee. We need someone from the ACLU on the committee. We need someone from society, a regular person on that committee that can look at the things independently. And it's not just one agency looking after their own and investigating their own, but it's everybody that makes a decision. And if that committee comes back and says this case is one that needs to be prosecuted, so be it, we will do it.
Gotcha. Mr. Treppinger?
I'm all for independent investigations. I believe that eventually the charging decision has to be left to the district attorney's office, and that's what the individual elected district attorney, that's what their people are electing you for. If a committee comes to me with a finding, I'm going to review all the evidence, and I'm going to make that charging decision like I'd make any other charging decision. I don't care if it's an officer, I don't care if it's a judge, I don't care who it is, everybody should be treated equally.
And I hear both of you say that. You're so willing to charge officers, but the reality of it is, if you get into office, you're going to get some pushback on that. You're going to get some fire. You're going to get some criticism. How are you going to withstand that? Mr. Treffinger, since you finished with the answer, let me direct that question to you first. How are you going to withstand that? You know, people make campaign promises a lot. People get into office and they feel the pressure from the public, they feel the pressure from these agencies, and suddenly they roll those things back. What are you going to do differently should you be elected?
And I think it's a matter of courage. It's a matter of being able to come forward and say, look, if it's wrong, it's wrong. I don't care what the unions say. I don't care what any individual person says. And it goes back to what I said earlier. You're enforcing the law without passion or prejudice. Every case should be evaluated with the same eye. And I know it's easy for me to sit here and say this now because I'm not in office. But I think anyone who knows me in my personal life will tell you I'm a straight shooter. If it's wrong, I'm going to tell you if it's wrong. If it's a case that should be charged, I'm going to charge it. And if I don't, I expect to be held accountable in the next election cycle or however else I can be disciplined for not holding up to that promise.
Mr. Fumo, same question.
I'm not anti-law enforcement. I am pro-justice. And let me tell you a little story. Last time I ran for election, I got the PPA endorsement. I got a letter where they said, we endorse you. Because when I was at the legislature, I supported all of their issues. I was with them on their medical, their health, 100%. And then George Floyd died. And then there was a rally. Minister Stretch Sanders had 6,000 people in North Las Vegas.
Go Stretch.
Right? Great man. Great rally. And there was a picture of me with my fist in the air because I support equal justice under the law. And I support Black Lives Matter. And I got a visit from law enforcement the next day, within a week. Maybe it wasn't the next day. And said, we saw this picture of you. We need you to renounce Black Lives Matter. We need you to say Blue Lives Matter, or we're going to pull the endorsement. And I told them that they could stick their endorsement, let them out of my office, and I didn't get that endorsement. And I don't want it. I don't want an endorsement for someone that's going to try to hold their thumb over you. That's who I am. That's how you know that when they comes to be prosecuted, I will do the right thing by the people, because I felt I did the right thing by the people when I had my fist in the air with Black Lives Matter.
Okay. Mr. Curry, you have a question?
Yes. The district attorney's office currently has a conviction integrity unit. And so the question is, do you believe that unit is currently working effectively as it is currently implemented? And what would you do to review cases where there has been a bad conviction? And I'll start with you, Mr. Treffinger.
I do support that unit. I will say that. I've recently had a defendant who I helped during his prison term who was ultimately exonerated via that unit. So I do believe that it has a place. I'm not sure how effectively it's being run because you don't hear a lot about it as a frontline defense attorney, I should say. I'm for keeping that office. I'm for staffing it. I'm for making sure that cases that lead to conviction are done righteously. And I think the only way to do that is to make sure there is someone looking at the back end and evaluating prisoner concerns and things of that nature. Just because we sustain a conviction doesn't mean we always get everything right. I think everyone in this room would agree that no one's perfect. The DA's office isn't perfect. The DA isn't perfect. And therefore, that system needs to stay in place.
Mr. Fumo?
I'm absolutely in favor of a conviction integrity unit, but it can't be someone from the district attorney's office. It's just like the fox guarding the hen house again. How difficult it is for the one person in the district attorney's office to look at those files and then go to someone he parks next to. He's been to birthday parties at his house. He works with him in court. He sees him every day in the hall and in the elevator and says, you know what, you did this wrong. We're going to take this case over. We're going to reverse this case. It doesn't happen very often. So I would like to do the same thing I'd like to do with the police brutality unit is get a team of people, a defense attorney, someone from the ACLU, a prosecutor, a police officer, an investigator. Let's get a group of people together, look at this independently with a fresh set of eyes. So it's not just the district attorney telling his buddy this, because it doesn't happen that often. It's a group, and the group can say yay or nay. And that's the way I would change that unit.
Okay. Either of you have another question? I have one, of course. Let's talk about misdemeanors and what misdemeanors are charged. Right now, there are efforts to get some misdemeanors decriminalized, legalized, and just taken off the books. You mentioned earlier the misuse of a park bench. Many of these current misdemeanors that are on the books affect our homeless population. There are things like not being able to sit on a sidewalk for a long time, misuse of a park bench. Also, up until AB 116 was passed, which goes into effect next year, driving with a broken taillight is a misdemeanor. Not having a current vehicle registration. All of these things are misdemeanors. And the result of that is that we're seeing people being swept up into a system of poverty that keeps them in poverty via these misdemeanors. Day one, district attorney, or maybe week one, district attorney, what misdemeanors are you going to order your deputies not to charge for? And what misdemeanors would you like to see be either decriminalized or legalized? I'll start with you.
Okay, so these misdemeanor traffic violations, that's going to go by the wayside. This misuse of a park bench, impeding the flight of a pigeon, these ridiculous things that they like to charge people
Impeding
with.
the flight of a
They have
pigeon.
some ridiculous laws on the books, and those kind of things are not going to be prosecuted if they're arrested. And that you're right, because what it does, and what you said is it affects people. No, it doesn't. It affects the disenfranchised. It affects the poor. And it keeps them disenfranchised, and it keeps them poor, because the system right now is set up to do that. And if they don't pay their bill as a person, or their fines to the court, they get a warrant, and then the fee is doubled. It happens in Henderson, it happens in North Las Vegas, and it happens in Justice Court. And those ridiculous type of misdemeanors will no longer be prosecuted, because I'm not soft on crime, I'm tough on justice. I am going to go after the murderers, the sex offenders, the home invasions, the violent criminals are going to feel the full weight of our office coming against them. These ridiculous misdemeanors, these first-time nonviolent offenders, they will not be prosecuted. They'll be put into programs so that they can become productive members of society.
Mr. Treppinger, same question.
And I agree that the traffic misdemeanors got to go. They're not helping anybody. It's not making our community any safer. I spent a long time in New Orleans. I went to University of Loyola New Orleans, and I remember people being arrested down there for blocking the sidewalk and things. Ridiculous crimes. Mr. Fumo's right. There are some misdemeanors that are solely targeted at putting people in jail who probably should be in a mental health facility or in a homeless shelter or in a variety of other things. And there are programs that we can put into place to stop basically making these people into hardened criminals by putting them in jail where they learn more bad things, kick them back out, more crimes, ridiculous crimes, getting them in debt with the court, constantly having warrants, having to worry about that every day driving around or walking down the street. It doesn't help anyone. So I'm not for charging, blocking the sidewalk, blocking a park bench, any of these ridiculous things, and I certainly don't believe that traffic infractions should be misdemeanors.
And many times the issue is that the infraction is on the books, period, and officers are arresting for that. And I understand that both of you have said in many cases you will not charge for these, but many times by the time it gets to your office, someone has already spent 3 days in jail. They've been there over the weekend or during the week. They may have lost their job. They may have lost their home because they have not been able to get to work. And they may have, in fact, had a violent interaction with law enforcement. Not only does that put the individual's life in danger, but it also puts our officers' lives in danger. We've heard from officers who say they believe that there are some of these misdemeanors that just should not be on the books. Not necessarily a question to either of you. I'm just wondering if you would support some decriminalization and legalization so that those infractions are not even arrestable offenses, and officers are not having to pull people over for having a light not working on their bicycle that resulted, we know, in a case recently. I believe it was Isaiah Washington. I believe it was. So, would either of you support decriminalization of some of those minor misdemeanors or legalization? And I know you don't write laws as a district attorney, but the district attorney in Clark County carries some weight. And so I'm wondering if legislation comes up, will you be supportive of that?
Two things. Yes, I would. I spent 2 sessions at the Nevada State Legislature, and I would go up there and lobby or send my lobbyists up there to encourage that, because we need to focus, again, on the murders, the home invasions, the sex, the important crimes. These things are wasting our time. And sometimes, you said the officers are just doing it because it's on the books, but sometimes, I'm a father and I'm a grandfather, and sometimes you have to set boundaries with your children. And maybe if law enforcement sees that we are not prosecuting those cases, and when they charge them and they're in the detention center, we're not opposing their release and we're dismissing those charges, maybe they'll learn through repetition that maybe they're wasting their time, and maybe they should be spending their time on the strip protecting the lifeblood of this community. Maybe they should be protecting the guys who are committing the murders and the home invasions rather than these little misdemeanors.
Mr. Treppinger.
I agree. The focus needs to be on the crimes that are harming our community, harming our small business owners, harming the lifeblood of this city, which is a lot of our tourists. I would commit to decriminalizing some of these things. I don't need deputies sitting in court prosecuting park bench violations or traffic light violations or anything of that nature. where could that attention be better suited? Sex trafficking, murders, high-level sex crimes, pedophiles, things of that nature. That's where the focus needs to be. That's what makes our community safer.
Thank you. We've got about 10 more minutes in our panelist question session. In audience, you will be able to get your questions answered. So if you have questions and you have not submitted it yet, please do so in the chat function on Facebook Live and also on YouTube. Mr. Curry, one more
Yes.
question?
Thank you. So this next question is about youth justice. How would you contribute to helping in the school to prison pipeline? We know that there's research that says that juveniles are they develop later on, and so historically they've been held less culpable in the criminal justice system. What's your position on that, and what can you do to help with this issue? And I'll start with Mr. Treffinger.
I think education is an important thing. I think if we can fix some of our school district issues, and I know that doesn't fall into the purview of the district attorney, but there's something to be said about having a school district that's ranked where it is so far towards the bottom, and then look at the violent crime and the things in our communities. I will say this, I participated in law school with a program, it was kind of like trial by peers, where we had high school students representing their peers, a jury of high school students doing the verdicts involving children in the criminal justice system and showing them with their peer group that they're going on the wrong path. And I think that was a great thing, because the only person there that was not a teen was the law school advisors, those of us sitting on the prosecution or the defense side, and the judge. And the kids came up with the best punishments for each other because they know what's important to them. And when they get that accountability early, that can stop the violent crimes and things that come down the road later. So I'm all for generating as many of those programs as we possibly can, and I would put forth the DA's office to support those programs in any way we can, because it will help the long-term prison population issue if we can get our kids educated early and get them to be held accountable early by their peer group. That's what's important.
Did you want to direct that question to Mr. Fumo as well?
Yes.
Okay.
I spent 2 years, like I said, at the Nevada State Legislature, and one of the things I learned while I was up there from Assemblywoman Brittany Miller, who was a teacher, is children's brains don't develop until they're 25. And what I will do is commit to treating children like children. If it's a nonviolent offense, we're going to get them into those programs and educate them. People used to ask me at the legislature, what can we do to stop this playground to prison pipeline? And my answer, they always thought I was going to say something about criminal justice reform. And what I would say is, put money into early childhood education, because a child who graduates elementary school is less likely to commit a crime than one that doesn't. And a child that graduates high school is even more less likely to commit a crime. And a child that graduates college is almost insignificant to commit a crime. And one that graduates graduate school, it's probably a white-collar crime. It's unheard of. We need to put money into early childhood education. And by bail reform and reducing the population of the jail, we can do that. We have 15,000 people in custody in the state of Nevada at $200 a day. That's over $1 billion a year we spend warehousing people, incarcerating people. And if we can cut that number down by keeping only the violent and the convicted in custody, we could put that money into mental health services, early childhood education, treating children like children, and maybe one day we won't have as big of a problem as we do right now under Steve Wilson's leadership.
In addition to putting money into early childhood education, I am an advocate for getting rid of unnecessary fines and fees and allowing that money to stay in communities. We are extracting so much money from communities through petty misdemeanors, through fines and fees. Imagine what those communities could do to support themselves if that money was allowed to stay in those communities. If those parents and those families didn't have to use that money to go pay fines and fees for minor traffic violations and things like that, they could take that money and put into their children's education.
Absolutely.
They can put that money into their, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Absolutely.
Mr. West.
If you would be so kind, I'm the father of 3 adult sons. My youngest son has lost hope. He does not believe in voting. He's anti anything that sounds like politics. He runs the other way. In his lifetime, he has watched one too many situations where men that look like him were murdered, and it just seemed like justice was not served. If you would be so kind, and I hope he's watching tonight, would you speak to the camera and share with him why he needs you as his DA?
That's a great question.
I'll start with you,
Start with me.
please. Yeah, please.
I think it comes down to what, and you've probably heard me use the word consistency and equality multiple times, but that's what you need out of this position. No matter who gets elected, you need consistency and equality because that will bring hope back into the communities. You don't want to see a larger portion of the black community being prosecuted than the white community. You don't want to see these issues that come up in law enforcement. But what this office can do is bring equality and consistency to law enforcement because honestly, at the end of the day, they can bring us the cases. We don't have to prosecute them. We do have investigators that can go out and investigate cases, though. We can commit to bringing justice to the community and bringing justice to everyone, not just to certain groups.
Thank you. Mr. Fumo.
Young man, your life has value. You have value. You have something to give back to this community. Your father raised you right. You are worthy. And when you don't vote and you don't participate, you let evil men win. You cannot do that because your life is worth more than that. As a community, young people who say, it doesn't matter if I vote, it absolutely does because every single vote does count. You can win or lose an election by one vote. And if you don't get out there and support the candidate that reflects your values, then you're going to get someone in there who doesn't because that's what they're counting on. So remember that. You have something to give back. Your life has value and you are worthy.
Thank you for that. We have a few more minutes, so I'm going to use moderator discretion to take the last question. Gentlemen, currently in the district attorney's office, I understand that there are different units. There's family, there's criminal. I understand that a woman heads up one unit in the district attorney's office, and I believe that's the family division. If either of you is elected district attorney, what will you do? I'm sure you're going to get some pushback, but what will you do to bring more women to heading up those divisions within the district attorney's office outside of family? I think a woman should be heading up the criminal division. That's just me. What will you do to make it so that more women are leading those different units in the district attorney's office?
So there's four divisions. You've got the criminal division, the civil division, the juvenile justice, and then in the collection for the child support. And I think there might be a woman who handles the civil as well as the juvenile. So what I will do day one is make sure that we have a district attorney's office that reflects the community. We do not have that at this time. There's no black people, not a lot of black district attorneys in that office. I'm going to go on a hiring tour and a listening tour. I'm going to go to historically black colleges and Boyd Law School here. We have great attorneys. I teach there. We have great students, great attorneys that come out of that thing, and they're not even considered because they don't fit the type. And we will have a district attorney's office that reflects the community. We will have women in power in the criminal division. I get a lot of slack, a lot of calls, texts pulled aside from women in that office. And if I can, just tell you a quick story. Women are told me that there's a misogynistic attitude in that office right now. If you are a woman and you get pregnant, you're told you will not receive any promotions. You're not going to rise in the ranks. And if you want to take your kids to school, they give you a 7:30 arraignment court. And if you can't get your kids to school, so be it. So what? Find another way. Hire somebody else to help. But if you get someone to trade with you, they don't have kids or their kids are grown, and they do the early court, and you do their later court, you're told you're insubordinate. That's going to change. We are going to treat everybody in that office with dignity and respect. And I don't mean just the lawyers. I mean the paralegals, the support staff. I heard another story that there's a Starbucks right by the court. And some of the support staff, they go to the Starbucks when they're having their breaks, and there was a memo sent out, no more overtime. Because if you got time to go to Starbucks, you don't need overtime. Wow. That's going to change. Like I said, everybody in that office, I hope you're listening, you will be treated with dignity and respect, and we will have a district attorney's office that works together, works with the community, and reflects this community.
Mr. Treffinger, we have 2 minutes.
Sure.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
There's no place for misogyny or toxic anything in any office, frankly, but especially not in one that has the important charging decisions and community responsibilities that the DA's office has. I agree. I think there needs to be diversity in the office. I think the best candidates should be brought in from wherever we can get them from, and I would commit to going to the schools and recruiting them as well. I think there's a tremendous amount of talent that's being overlooked, especially here in Nevada, in the county, from UNLV. I've worked with some students from law school, and I'm amazed at the legal minds that we're producing here. And it shocks me that it's underrepresented in the DA's office. I won't specifically commit to hiring any number of anybody, but I will go out and find the best candidates, and I will be gender blind, and I will be racially blind, and just go off the candidates' qualifications as well as meeting with them and talking to them. I want the best legal minds in the office. It makes my job easier.
Well, you heard it here. That concludes our panelist questions for our candidates running for Clark County District Attorney. We are now ready for audience questions. So I'm going to turn it over to our tech people. This question comes from Ms. Tricia Matthews. Mr. Trevinger, in doing my research on you, I learned that you were arrested in 2015 in Nye County for a serious drug charge. Please tell us the circumstances that led you to that arrest. Make that bigger, y'all. I can't see that. Where are you educated? Were you adjudicated? If so, what was the resolution of that case?
So this is not something I hide from. I have to discuss this in my practice pretty much every day. I was arrested for possession of narcotics. I can tell you that it was mainly to do with an ex-girlfriend I had who developed a drug issue, and instead of kicking her out of my home, which apparently would be what they would have preferred, I was trying to get her clean. And in the same county that I prosecuted cases in Nye County, because when I was with the AG, I was based out of the Pahrump DA's office, I had a SWAT team kick down my door, even though I was very familiar with the administration, and the sheriff at the time had been my investigator on all the Violence Against Women Act crimes we had. Instead of that case being pled down, since it was a very small amount of heroin that was found in my house, I was forced to do 3 years of diversion, which I did successfully. Not hating on the diversion program. I think it's a great program. I'm a product of it. I kept my law license because I went through that program, and I had never been in trouble before in my life. It did open my eyes to the criminal justice system because my case was not treated like everyone else's case, and that's why when you hear me talk about consistency and equality, regardless of who it is, you need to address things in the same way. So if my case was normally pled down to a misdemeanor and someone was trying to make an example of me, no one should be made an example of. There are no special cases, really. Everyone has to have the law applied equally. I will note that I successfully completed that program. I never had a dirty drug test. And at the end of a 3363 program diversion, which is the felony diversion program, they do dismiss the case. I was never adjudicated guilty, and my records were sealed. But it did certainly open my eyes, because when you go through the probation process and you deal with a probation officer, it's an eye-opening experience, and I would take that experience and try to mold my cases so that there aren't people being made examples of and people are treated fairly, because I certainly feel that I wasn't.
Gotcha. Life gives you lemon, make lemonade, huh?
That's all I can do.
Or add some Hennessy to it. All right. Next question from our viewers. Just joking about the Hennessy. Ms. Laura Martin asks, how will you be different from Steve Wolfson in holding police accountable for violence and officer-involved shootings? I'm thinking that question is to both of you, and I know you both touched on it before, but I'm going to ask you if you could just answer that again for Ms. Laura Martin. Thank you, Laura. Mr. Fumo, go ahead.
We will hold police accountable. We will hold them because I want what's equal justice under the law. Right now, under Steve Wolfson's administration, it's only the 1% who have equality and justice under the law. But it's we, the people, that control this. It's we, the people. The other 99%. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. And we're going to change that. And so whether you're an officer or you're just Joe Citizen or an attorney who has a girlfriend in your house that you're trying to get better, and there's drugs in the house, there's going to be consequences. I'm glad you completed the program. I'm glad that but you saw, your eyes were open. And whether it's the police or someone else, they will be treated exactly the same. And that we touched on it before, but I commit to having a panel, not just a police officer or a district attorney who's going to decide this charging, but a panel of people from the community who can hear the facts, listen to them fairly, and then decide what we're going to do. And I think Mr. Treffinger said it. The ultimate decision is the district attorney's whether to file, but I will take the advice of the panel as it comes forward.
Okay. Mr. Treffinger.
And I agree. I don't think it matters if you're a police officer, if you're court staff, if you're friends with the district attorney staff. Everybody needs to be treated equally. I can commit that if a deputy in my office commits a crime, if I can't prosecute it myself due to a conflict, I'll refer charges to the attorney general's office or to whoever is appropriate. But everyone is going to be treated equal. The law, no one is going to be protected. If you're a police officer and you're doing bad things, I think if either one of the people at this table get elected, you may want to find other employment. If you're doing what you're supposed to do, we're going to support you. You're the backbone of our community's safety in a lot of ways. But if you're doing the wrong thing, it's going to be prosecuted. I can promise you that.
All righty, next question. Mr. Fumo, do you support bail reform? Mr. Thomas, they answered that question earlier. Mr. Fumo did say he bail reform.
Absolutely, yes. If you Google me and you look at my history at the legislature, like I said, I put bills forward twice to change the way we practice bail in Nevada. The Valdez-Jimenez decision, it basically mirrors the language that I had in my law, where it's now the state's burden to prove by clear and convincing evidence that someone should be detained. And they should have to have a hearing on it where the evidence can be presented. And we can come up with non-monetary solutions when we're going to release someone back to the community. It's much like the federal system. If you're a danger to the community, you're detained. If you're not, we can fashion non-monetary conditions for your release. And it works very well.
Next question. This question comes from the lovely Miss Sandra Cosgrove. What will both men do to keep the mentally ill out of jail? Mr. Treffinger, let's start with you.
I can tell you, I do have a background in psychology. My undergrad degree was in psychology.
Hey, me too.
And I missed the psych JRE date and went to law school, and here I sit. So, but what I can say is you do need to address the mentally ill population in a different way. Putting them in the jail usually causes more mental health issues, not less. I would commit to the problem is getting that information from law enforcement. We need to track mentally ill detainees. They need to be treated a certain way. They need to be evaluated. If it turns out that they don't need to be in the jail, they need to be in a mental health facility, we need to make that option available to get some of these people out of CCDC and into the place where they're actually going to get some help. Same thing with the homeless situation. There's a lot of mental illness throughout the homeless population, and they end up in our jails. It's not the right place for them. My goal would be to network with as many agencies as possible to get these people evaluated when they're in custody and get them where they need to be, because it's likely not at the detention center.
Got it. Mr. Fumo.
The Clark County Detention Center was not built to be, nor is it equipped to be a mental health facility. Unfortunately, it is the largest mental health hospital we have in the state. That needs to change day one. We need to stop arresting people for mental health issues and get them the support and the help they need. And that's why I keep saying we can save that $1 billion budget that we have right now, and we can chop that down. And instead of building more prisons, we can build hospitals. It costs $200 a day, $73,000 a year to keep a person in custody. It doesn't cost that much to get them the mental health treatment that they need. Most people can do it outpatient. They just need the meds, they need the supervision. And the other thing we need to do is stop blocking people from getting into those programs. The district attorney's office right now is the gatekeeper to mental health court, to veterans court, to drug court. When I first started 26 years ago, when you completed the 3-year program, drug court, mental health court, your case was dismissed. Now it's a condition of probation, and you got that felony on your record. That is going to stop. We are going to treat mental health issue what it is, a medical condition, not a crime.
Got it. All right, we've got time for more questions. Let's go. This question comes from Ambessa Negas. Fumo, what will you do about the issue about inmates incarcerated and the issue with getting on the pardons board? What are the criteria about getting on the pardons board? And what will you do about that?
So the pardons board right now is made up of the Supreme Court, the Attorney General, the governor is on the pardons board. So that's the makeup, of the board, and it's very difficult because there's an office you have to apply to get someone a pardon to that board to get on, and you need someone on that board to say, okay, we'll bring the case forward and we'll hear that case.
Is that something the district attorney has some say over?
No, because the district attorney is usually writing letters blocking people from getting
gotcha,
out and getting the
gotcha.
pardons they need. What I would commit to is having a person, division, a unit looking into those cases, because I think people do get rehabilitated. We're the only country that gives people these outrageous life sentences. In other countries, they give them reasonable sentences where they can learn to change their ways, be productive members of society. And I think that when you've spent a significant amount of time and you've paid your debt to society and you've honored your social contract with society, you deserve to come out. And we don't need to warehouse those people. Again, at $73,000 a year, spending $1 billion a year warehousing people, that money that we can save, we can put back into education.
And just to be clear, that $73,000 is per inmate.
Per inmate.
Mr. Trevinger, I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer that question also, if you'd like to, about the Pardons Board.
And I've had some limited dealings with the Pardons Board. It is incredibly difficult to get a defendant, or I'm sorry, an inmate onto that schedule. Again, the DA's office doesn't really directly involve themselves with that. I'm not sure I would commit a unit to that. I think the conviction integrity unit type stuff will deal with some of these issues, but I can commit to the fact that I don't plan on writing letters to block people from going to the Pardons Board. I think that's outside the purview of what we should be doing. There are people who review that, Supreme Court justices, the Attorney General. There are very qualified people on that panel. We've done our job. If we've gotten the conviction and they've served their time, let them have their shot with the Pardons Board. I'm certainly not going to block anyone.
Got it. And we do have a very capable Attorney General at this time. Let's go to our next question, please. Ms. Yancey asks, do you feel the racial and ethnic disparities in the certifications of youth sent to adult court is troubling and worth looking into ending this particular practice?
Yes, because we have 26% black population in Clark County, and the number that are certified up is much higher than that. I don't know the exact number, but I think it's more than triple. And that's got to change. We need to look into those and look into why those things are happening.
I'm not necessarily for completely ending the practice, but as I've said with the death penalty and with no knock warrants, it is a tool. It is for very specific circumstances, and I think it should have very limited use. We should track those statistics so we know if there's a disparate community being used for those certifications. I'd use them in very, very limited circumstances. I would say that.
Gotcha. Next question. This comes from Mr. Robert Bush to both attorneys. Please tell us what you know about the Byron Williams and George Gomez cases, and will you agree to review and reopen them? Let's start with you, Mr. Fumo.
Absolutely. More familiar with the George Gomez case, where the police shot an individual who was exercising his Second Amendment right to protest at the courthouse with his weapon out and was shot. And that's what I'm talking about when I say videos that I can turn over, I will turn over. Our current district attorney is refusing to do that. And it's almost insulting. And I want to apologize to Mrs. Gomez about what happened to your son. And the fact that the district attorney and the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is blocking justice from you. Not even giving you the courtesy, the time and attention to see the video of what your son's last breath was like. I commit to reviewing those cases, looking at those cases, being transparent with the community, because that's what it's about.
Mr. Treffinger.
And I'm in agreement on that. I think we need more transparency. I think this jurisdiction releases far less body cam and unedited body cam than a lot of other places do. What are we hiding from? I mean, those videos are what they are. And if we're making mistakes, let's go fix those mistakes. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I would be happy to review any case, not just these two. I would maintain the open door policy that Mr. Wolfson has. That I agree with him. That's a great thing. You need to interface with the community. But if these things are brought to my attention, I'm reviewing them. I'm releasing the videos. We should have nothing to hide. If we're hiding things, we're not doing our job.
Got it. Shout out to all of the viewers who are hosting watch parties tonight. I'm kind of excited to hear that people are engaged and people are watching and people want answers. So let's have the next question, please. Mr. Marco Lerma asks, what is your stance on the current environment of illegal street racing? Either of you have an opinion on that, Mr. Treffinger?
If it's being done in a way that is endangering our community, it's something that needs to be looked at. I think we have racetracks. I know that there are several just around the community where you can go and race and do it in a safer manner. If you're doing things that end up with people losing lives, it's something that's going to get prosecuted. I don't think it's something that we can blanketly state is okay or not okay.
Sure.
But if you're endangering people and you're causing injuries, it's a problem.
All right. The key word was illegal. So, Mr. Fumo?
Yeah, I
same
absolutely
question?
do know about it, and I hear it at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm a sound sleeper, but my wife Ellen isn't, and she says, "You hear that?" Wakes me up every night when we hear the illegal
Hey,
street
Ellen.
racing going on. And so, yeah, I am aware of it, and I think it's wrong. When I was at the legislature, Tom Roberts, assemblyman, who's now running for sheriff, brought a bill up there to criminalize the street racing because it is a problem, and it's more than just traffic tickets and things like that. This is a danger to the community. It's reckless driving, and it puts not only their lives in danger, it puts other people's lives in danger, and that does need to stop. Mr. Treffinger said we have race tracks where they can go to, and there's a place where we can do, and that's why I want to get together with people when they do get caught. We don't need to punish or send them to prison. What we need to do is say, hey, there's a racetrack over there where you can go. You don't need to do it on the street and put other people's lives in danger.
All right. Next question. Ms. Marie Shorty, there is a high number of juveniles being recommended for certification, and often they are children of color. What steps will be taken to address this serious assault on communities of color? I believe both of you have already addressed that question. Both of them have, Ms. Shorty did already answer that question, and both of them, correct me if I'm wrong, agree that those, they would not do automatic certifications, or
Absolutely.
am I saying that correctly? Am I saying that correctly? They both did address that question.
Correct.
All right, next question, please. Well, now this one is long. Mr. Treffinger, supporting the death penalty means putting a human to death because you are 100% certain about this person committing a crime. To be 100% right, 100% of the time is impossible. Why do you support the death penalty knowing this circumstance is highly possible and that you may contribute to putting someone to death who was later proved innocent? I believe you addressed that also. Would you like to reiterate what your answer was regarding the death penalty?
Sure. It's a tool. It's a very limited tool for a very limited set of cases, and you're right. Mistakes are going to be made, but you have to have a little bit of trust in the system and the ability to review cases and make sure that you are putting forth the right cases for the death penalty. I'm not going to say I'm never going to get it wrong, but I'm going to do my best to make sure I'm as close to 100% right as possible.
If I remember correctly, did you talk about a review
Yes.
panel?
Yeah,
Okay.
a review panel, and not just me. Again, I make as many mistakes as everybody else, maybe more so. But at the same time, I would have community members, other staff people involved in that decision making. Final decision would be up to me, but I'm going to take the advice of the people around me who may have better ideas than I do.
Got it. Let's get our next question. What role do you believe officers should have on school campuses? This comes from Ms. Suzanne Lara. Mr. Fumo, let's go with you.
I think we already have school police on campuses already, and I don't know how effective it is. I think that there has to be some kind of presence, but what I'd like to see more of is school nurses and school counselors, licensed social workers, right? And people like that can de-escalate situations. We need places where they can go to. I have a friend who's a nurse, and she goes to like 4 or 5 different schools because we don't have the money to put a nurse, in every single campus. That needs to change. That's what I'm talking about putting money into early childhood education, because a nurse, a licensed clinical social worker, can prevent a lot of those things from happening. So I think it's more about getting the right people into those positions, especially with our youth and at the schools.
Thank you. Mr. Treffinger.
I think there is a place for them in the schools. I think the tremendous amount of violence that we have seen just in our school district recently is a reflection that maybe they're not being used to the best of their ability. I remember back when I was young, DARE officers, community officers, interfacing with students, kind of the same thing with the peer prosecution of juvenile crimes. If you can get good relationships between those school officers and the students, I think you'll see a large reduction in violent crime for sure within the schools. I'm all for social workers. Obviously, counselors need to be brought in, but some of these officers can identify the problems and get these kids to the social workers. I'm not saying put officers in schools to prosecute every kid who steps out of line, but there needs to be a relationship between our young people and the law enforcement community. And I think the more comfortable that we can ultimately be with each other, the better.
Now, I have a question for you. I want to just follow up because you mentioned some of the violence that we're seeing in school. Did you think that there was an uptick in violence in some of the schools? And what kind of violence are you talking about? Are you talking about some of the racial tensions that we're seeing in some of our high schools around the valley? Are those specifically what you're talking about?
I'm unclear as to whether it's an uptick or whether it's just that we're finding out
I'm sorry
more
about
about
that.
it.
Those were my words. I probably should not have said that.
But it could be an uptick. Here's the great thing about cell phones. Everyone's got them, and everyone's on video all the time now. So we're seeing a lot of stuff we wouldn't have seen before. I think violence shouldn't be tolerated on school property, regardless of whether it's for racial tensions or for other reasons. But I'm definitely referring to the whole system. If we can get school resource officers to actually build relationships with these kids, you're going to see a lot of the stuff drop off, and you're going to see a lot less arrests and there are some of the videos I've seen recently with these large brawls going on in the hallways. The DA's office and Clark County School District Police need to step in and build better relationships to stop this stuff from happening.
Okay. Let's take more audience questions, please. This comes from Miss Renita Clayton. Hi, Renita. I would like to know, in efforts to keep the community safe, will you stop allowing repeated DUI drivers and repeated BDV? I'm thinking, I'm not sure what the B is in DV, domestic violence offenders, to stop pleading to first on the charges and start pleading to higher penalties. Ozzy, let's go.
First of all, the B is battery,
Battery,
domestic violence,
domestic
and
violence, got
DUI
it.
cases. And one of the problems
He
that-
set me straight, y'all. Yeah.
You know, when I was at the legislature, everybody would say, we want to be tough on crime, we got to be tough on crime. And I would say to the people then, why don't we charge, because what happens in Nevada right now is you get a first offense battery domestic violence, it's a misdemeanor. You get a second offense battery domestic violence, it's a misdemeanor. Well, if you haven't learned the first time, there has to be higher consequences. And what we do is we charge them a higher fee. There's a little bit more counseling. And I would say, why don't we make that a gross misdemeanor? Because in Nevada, we have felonies, we have gross misdemeanor, and we have a misdemeanor. Make it a gross misdemeanor. Make it hurt. They can go to jail. They can go to so a misdemeanor is defined as up to 6 months in the Clark County Detention Center. A gross misdemeanor is up to a year in the Clark County Detention Center, and a felony is a year or more in Nevada State Prison. And the same goes for DUIs. If you have a DUI and it's a first offense, it's a misdemeanor. A second offense is still a misdemeanor. Why are we doing that? Make it a gross misdemeanor. Make there higher consequences. I agree with you. If you're going to have that in the system, if you want there to be higher penalties, make it hurt. Make the second offense what it is. And the state has the burden to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury of their peers at that point, because a gross misdemeanor would be tried in front of a jury. But misdemeanor battery domestic violence are also tried in front of a jury now too.
Mr. Trevinger?
DUI, it's specifically domestic violence, hits close to home because that's all I got to prosecute when I was with the AG's office. I don't think those cases are taken seriously enough. That was one of the reasons that my position was created, because they were ignoring those cases in the rural counties. I used to cover from Pahrump all the way to Hawthorne, Nevada, that whole stretch of highway, doing all the battery domestics and the sex crimes. We don't need to plead them all out to firsts. Excuse me. We need to hold people accountable. The first time I've seen battery DVs with spitting or a minor touch that are overcharged, I've seen people get away with beating up their significant other over and over again, and it's always brought down to a first. No, we have an escalating scale for a reason. If someone's on their third, fourth, fifth, sixth domestic violence case or DUI, they need to do a prison sentence if that's the only way that's going to wake them up, that they can't treat people that way. And same thing for the DUIs. You're putting our communities at risk. Look at the damage that DUI does to our community. These people need to be held accountable. I won't be pleading them all out to firsts, that's for sure.
Okay. Next question. This comes from Ms. Leslie Turner. To both of you, can you talk about the problem with plea deals and overcharging? Now, Ms. Turner did specify any particular, any specific problems. So, Mr. Fumo, tell us if you have any problems with the current system of plea deals and overcharging.
Yes, so the plea deals and overcharging, again, disproportionately affects the disenfranchised, the people of color in the community and the people that can't afford, so the poor are disproportionately affected by overcharging. And let me tell you what happens. The district attorney's office will come in, and maybe there's one legitimate charge in a case, and they'll file about 10 other charges. And a client who's in custody, because they keep him in there under a high bail, if they can't get out, they've lost their job, they've lost their house, they've probably lost their family because people have to move on and live with other people, and usually that's out of state. So what happens is they say, I'll plead guilty to something, just get me out of here. And so the district attorney knows that. And they have you plead to something to get out, but now you're a felon. and maybe you're pleading to something you didn't do. And it's happened over and over. And I've been practicing for 26 years, and I can't tell you how many times I've begged a client, don't do this. Because if you didn't do it, you can't stomach you pleading guilty to something you didn't do. And I assure you that you're going to come back to me in about 2 or 3 years and say, why did you let me do this? Because now I can't find a job. Because now I'm a felon. And that practice has to stop. I want to treat people with dignity and respect, charge them for exactly what they did, not overcharge so that we don't have this waste of time and waste of resources in our community.
Okay, Mr. Treffinger.
And I agree, overcharging is an immense problem in the current administration. And if you can appropriately value a case, and I am blessed, I came out to the state from law school. I was in a tiny little town where I was the only deputy DA up in Virginia City, Nevada, and my boss taught me how to charge a case effectively. And because of that, I didn't have a lot of issues with plea deals because I was only charging people for what the evidence supported. And if you do that, you stop, number one, warehousing people in jail because their bails are astronomical. You stop putting on trials for cases that should never have to go to trial with the immense burden that puts not only on the DA's office, but the judicial system. And trials are expensive. That's all money that can be saved if you just charge appropriately. And I think treating everyone equally with respect, charging only the conduct that's alleged that factually matches with the law for a crime, that will eliminate a lot of the issues.
Gentlemen, I have heard when it comes to the district attorney's office and this issue of overcharging and plea deals, that within that department, promotions a lot of times are based on how many cases that an associate district attorney can get pled down. I understand that it's all, but they don't want to go to trial. They would rather have a person plead to some charges rather than go to trial, and that many times promotions within that office are based on that. I would like to hear each of you your thoughts on that, and if that is the case, what would you do as district attorney to change that within change that culture? Let's start with you, Oscar.
I think that practice is absurd, and that would stop day one. And I would give my district attorneys the autonomy to make those decisions for themselves. There's no longer going to be a 5-trial rule where you have to put so many cases on. There's no longer going to be a situation where you have to overcharge and get so many plea deals. Because sometimes justice is dismissing a case. Sometimes justice is letting a young man or young woman go through a program, pay their debt to society, and give them that reward. Like I was talking about the drug court. No longer will you do a 3-year program, intense counseling, work with your family, stay off drugs, get tested, and then have a felony on your record. We're going to give you the benefit of the bargain that if you can commit to that, then we're going to commit to dismissing that case. If you come back, there might be other charges that we have to deal with, maybe more intense programming. But no longer are we going to do that.
Okay, Mr. Treffinger?
I would agree. If that is the policy, and I honestly don't know one way or the other, I think it is absurd.
I'm sure it's not a written policy, maybe more of a practice rather than a policy.
Even if it's a practice, it's absurd. You can't. It forces people to do the wrong thing. You can't have deputies who are afraid to charge the case like a rational human being. If you have a DUI and you're then stacking on resisting arrest because you wouldn't get out of the car immediately, or these ridiculous things that get tacked on, that's not justice. You're not helping anybody. You're increasing spending, you're increasing warehouse time in jail, you're putting on trials you don't have to put on, because some people will take deals, as Mr. Fumo said. Some people will say, screw you guys, I'm just going to go to trial then. Cases that should easily have led to plea agreements. That's the problem with overcharging cases. That's the problem with having a 5-trial rule. That's the problem with all of these things. Promote people based on the good decisions they make. If you have good deputies who are trying cases the way they should be tried, fairly, equally, it's not even a win-loss rate. Sometimes you have to try a case to try a case. That's the way our system works. It shouldn't be about wins. I mean, unless someone's really deficient in their duties, it shouldn't be about wins and losses. It's prosecuting crimes without passion or prejudice and evaluating cases correctly.
Got it. Next question, please. This comes from Mr. Javon Jackson. Will you end the use of legal restraint chairs in Clark County Detention Center? Mr. Treffinger, let's start with you.
If the restraint chairs are causing deaths, they should not be being used. There's plenty of other ways we can deal with people, and we can outfit the jail to deal with that situation better than with restraint chairs that are killing people. We have limited ability to change things at the jail. That a lot of that falls to the sheriff, but again, my plan is to partner with law enforcement in a way that will stop some of these practices. 2 separate agencies, but you have to work well together for any of this to work. And if things are going on at the jail that are causing deaths, then that needs to stop.
Gotcha. Mr. Fumo?
Yeah, that is a issue for the Metropolitan Police Department to figure out. But if we have a chair called the lethal death chair, that needs to stop. Nothing needs to be lethal at CCDC. Nothing needs to be lethal when someone's going under an arrest. We don't need lethal chokeholds. We don't need lethal chairs. We need to treat people with dignity and respect, because officers do have a tough job. They arrest people based on probable cause, but there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So just because you might have had probable cause, no reason to put them in a lethal death chair to bring them down. That's something that I would be opposed to, absolutely.
It's one thing to be opposed, which everyone is glad to hear that. If that were the case, would you investigate any officers who do that and possibly bring charges? Let's go with you, Mr. Fumo.
If a young person or any person died at the jail using lethal force by an officer, you bet.
Mr. Treffinger?
I agree. Every death's got to be investigated. Literally every death, whether it's on the street or in the jail. If the county is killing people, we have a duty to review that.
Got it. Next question. This is another question from Ms. Turner to both of you. What is your perspective on the Black Lives Matter movement? I think Mr. Fumo spoke very passionately about that. Well, there's your answer for Mr. Fumo. Mr. Treffinger?
I am all for the First Amendment. I believe that people have the right to go out there and protest as long as it's being done in a civil way. I'm not for protests on either side becoming violent. That goes for people who show up to counter-protest Black Lives Matter protesters. If you instigate violence or burning cars or robbing places, that's not protesting. Other than that, I'm absolutely for everyone coming out and protesting what they feel is right.
And I think for the most part, any Black Lives Matter protests that we have seen have been peaceful. And I think that's the issue that many folks watching and many folks in the activist community have, is that these protests have been peaceful. They have been exercising their amendment right to protest, and they've been labeled riots and labeled violence.
Right.
And a lot of the times the violence is not coming from them. In an overall way, I know, Mr. Fumo, you said you absolutely support Black Lives Matter and that entire movement. And you support people's right to be able to protest
Absolutely.
peacefully.
Absolutely.
Okay, but to say you support Black Lives Matter as a movement, not...
I'm not going to commit to saying I support it as a movement.
Sure.
I think there's problems in every movement. I think that there's problems in the police department, there's problems in the DA's office, there's problems within all of these movements. I will stay with, I am for the right to protest.
Gotcha.
I'm not going to prosecute people for peacefully protesting, and that's the important thing, is to view it through that
Got
lens.
it. Thank you. Next question. This comes from Yvette Williams. How will you work with community organizations and advocates as district attorney, and what role do you believe they should play, if any, in the criminal legal system? Will you commit to regular community conversations and seek opportunities to improve your department? And if so, what would that look like? Mr. Treffinger, since we ended with you, let's start with you on this question.
Sounds good. I think community organizations are crucial, really. Like I said, I'm the product of a diversion program that involved using community resources. You have to engage the mental health community. You need to engage the homeless shelters and outreach communities. You need to engage all of those things if you want to really have valid diversionary programs that help people and stop them from going back through the system. So I would have an open door policy to any agency who wants to speak with the DA's office. I would welcome them in. I would use whatever services they could provide that could make our community safer and get some of these people out of the jail and the places they need to be. And I would always keep it an open door to those conversations.
Mr. Fumo?
One of the things I said when I started was, I will go on a listening tour, and I will commit to doing that. I want to listen to all people of all communities. I'm not afraid to be here tonight. I wasn't afraid to be in front of a live audience. I'm not afraid to be out in the community. And I will go be out in the community listening, not talking, listening. And I will commit to having regular meetings, whether it's quarterly, annually, or when anybody wants to get together. I am an open door. I'm not the one that just says it. My cell phone is out there. Anybody from this community can call me and have a meeting and sit down with the deputies and sit down with myself, because we will be listening. One of the things I want to do, I go to these events put on by the Clark County commission a lot of times, and I see the public defenders with tables set up and booths and things like that, and I see the ACLU, and I see the Black Caucus out there, and I see other organizations, and I never see the district attorney's office. And one of the things I want to do is to commit with working with those partners in the community. I don't see the public defenders as my enemy. I see them as partners in the community. I don't see the defense bar as my enemy. I see them as partners in the community. And I don't see black men and women as my enemy, like some people do. I see them as partners in my community. I'm not afraid. I will be out there. Yes, I will commit to that.
All right. Gentlemen, I'm speaking to our panelists. Do either of you have a question you'd like to interject? If not, we'll go right back to our audience questions. All right, let's go. Next question from our viewers, please. This is from Mia Shell. Do any of the candidates support enforcing SWAT officers to wear body-worn cameras? Mr. Fumo.
Absolutely. When I was at the legislature, our current Attorney General, Aaron Ford, put together bills when he was the Senate Majority Leader to have officers wear body-worn cameras. I think it not only protects the community, it protects the officers as well. As a criminal defense attorney, I have had clients tell me, the officer did X, Y, and Z. I want you to get that body-worn camera. We'll prove it. And I've gotten that body-worn camera, and 9 times out of 10, they remember it wrong. The officer's camera actually justifies what they did. So it doesn't always hurt the police officers. It can protect you as well. It can be a sword and it can be a shield. And what are you afraid of? Wear the camera, show the public, and if it's right, we'll do something about it. If it's wrong, we'll do something about it.
And just to be clear, that's all divisions in police department, SWAT.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Treffinger?
And I concur with that. What are we hiding from? Everybody should have body-worn cameras. It protects people. It protects the officers. It protects defendants. I've even seen new technology where now they have cameras that can be attached to a firearm, and those are fantastic from what I've seen. Because now you see what the gun sees. And a lot of times with the hands extended, you're going to see more there than when they're blocked with the body camera. The more we can be transparent, the more trust there's going to be from the community. And it's important to me that the DA's office is trusted.
Got it. All right. Any more questions from our viewers? We'll take the next one. This comes from Ms. Leslie McGarry. Will either candidate start holding CPS responsible for children harm after a complaint was made and not followed up on? Wow. This is a good one. Yeah, Mr. Treffinger, let's start with you.
I think you have a duty to make sure these people are doing what they're supposed to do. CPS has a duty to investigate these cases. If that's not happening, then there do need to be measures taken to investigate those cases. CPS at times gets a bad rap for not investigating, and sometimes they get a bad rap for just yanking kids out of the home with seemingly no indication. And again, I think that comes down to consistency. The way that they bring those cases to the DA's office, because there are deputies that handle the family court cases. Consistency from those deputies and leadership in that office will hopefully stop some of these issues. And if they don't, I'll be supporting investigating them in other ways.
Okay. Mr. Fumo?
Leslie, that's a great question and one I hadn't thought of before. I applaud you for it. And I can tell you that if anybody, including CPS, commits a crime, then we will investigate and we will charge. And we will prosecute.
Okay. Next question. This comes from Suzanne Lara. Sexual violence in incarceration facilities is a significant problem for Nevada, including staff on inmate sexual violence. There is only one Prison Rape Elimination Act coordinator for this state. Do you commit to protecting incarcerated persons who are victims of sexual violence by another inmate or correctional staff? Mr. Fumo.
Absolutely, yes. Whether it's an inmate or another staff member who's committing that, they too will be prosecuted. There are cameras in the facilities, and like I said, that's part about being transparent. We're not going to hide that stuff anymore. If that's happening, it's on camera, you will be prosecuted. And if there's a valid complaint made, you will be listened to. And if there's a right to go forward, I will tell you right now, we will commit to prosecuting, because I believe in equal justice under the law. Whether you're a Joe Blow citizen or a police officer or a prison guard or another prisoner, you commit a crime, you will be prosecuted.
Mr. Treffinger.
And I absolutely agree. Like I said, we're not going to treat anyone with kid gloves, whether that be a police officer or a correctional officer. The sexual violence issue is a big issue. Again, we're not over the jail, so it's hard to have a lot of we can't install coordinators or things like that. What we can do is listen to every complaint, make sure those complaints are investigated, and whatever's going on, if it's illegal, needs to be prosecuted. Whether it's an inmate, whether it's a prison guard, it's the same thing with the drug issue in the jails that's harming our inmates as well. All of those things need to be transparently given out to the community, and they need to be prosecuted.
I know that there's been a really big issue, not only in this state, but across the country with juveniles who are being certified as adults and housed in adult facilities. Many of these sexual assaults are against those juveniles who are in adult facilities. And correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows that. I don't believe that in Nevada Department of Corrections, there is a separate unit for juveniles who are housed and charged as adults. I'm not sure, but I don't know if they're housed with adult inmates or if they're in solitary confinement, but I don't think there's a separate unit. And I think that's something that we've advocated for before. I just wanted to point that out just as a point of information. I don't know if either of you has a comment about that. I know as district attorney, you may be able to support legislation for something like that, but you wouldn't have a direct way to resolve any of that issue. But I just wanted to bring that up as a point of information.
I have a comment on it, too,
Absolutely.
because it is offensive that you take a child and you put them in an adult facility, and that happens. And you know where they are separate? Because we don't have a separate housing for them. You know where they're put? In the
Solitary?
mental health ward.
Mental health
It's
ward.
put on the second floor, and they're segregated from everybody else, and sometimes they're moved to solitary, and it's unlivable conditions. You can't survive like that. We are doing an injustice to our juveniles in this state. We need to have another facility or another program where maybe they can get out on house arrest and still live at home and defend themselves. Not everybody needs to be warehoused.
I agree. Any comment on that? No.
And I'll echo that. I think every inmate, regardless of age, needs to be treated with dignity and respect, but we need to protect the kids. The thought of a child being anywhere near some of these Gen Pop units in CCDC is horrifying. Sometimes when they're segregated, those conditions are horrifying. We need to address all of those issues, but we certainly need to protect the children.
I agree. Next question. This comes from Mr. Walter Jones. What are you going to do to protect young men of color to stay out of the prison system? I'm sure within the, as you say, purview, I like that you use that word, of the district attorney, what would either of you do? I mean, you have charging abilities, whether to charge or not.
Sure.
What would you do to keep young men of color out of the prison system? Mr. Treppinger.
And I think a big part of that is with these diversionary programs and these first-time offender programs. If we can get these kids help the first time they have contact with law enforcement and put them in a better position to succeed in life and get educated and avoid further issues, the less people you're going to see in prison. And the more we can do that, the better. Obviously, you can't give diversion to every cases. There are some violent crimes that younger people do that maybe we can't give them a diversion program. But everyone who can go into those programs should go into those programs. It takes the onus off of the DA's office. It takes the onus off of the jail that warehouse them. It gets them into a place where they can succeed, and we give them the opportunity to have that second chance to succeed.
Second chance, I like that. Mr. Fumo.
First thing we need to do is treat everybody equal under the law and stop treating the black and brown community different. We need to start enforcing the Valdez-Jimenez decision so that non-monetary conditions can be considered. Like I said, I've been practicing for 26 years. I'm in court every single day. And whether you walk into district court or justice court, what you see is black and brown men and women in chains. And when I'm arguing bail, I tell these judges, it doesn't go unnoticed to me, Your Honor, that we have 26% black male in Clark County, and you have 90% in chains. This is not 1863. This is 2022. And we need to start waking up and treating everybody the same. Not people that have money, not people of wealth, not people because they're white, not people because you have a billionaire and you have 96 ounces of meth on you and you're treated differently and you get a dismissal where a black man would still be in custody, where they would say to a black man, tell it to the jury. We need to start treating everybody equally, and that changes with my administration. No more of this burying our head in the sand and pretending it doesn't happen.
Okay. We've got about 10 more minutes in our audience question and answer session, so I'll take the next question. This comes from Joey Lankowski. Are you for decriminalizing sex work? Will your office continue to prosecute sex workers? Mr. Fumo.
I am for decriminalizing sex.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm just messing around.
I tell you, because a lot of times what's happening is the district attorney's office is filing charges against women for prostitution, and it's their men, their pimp, that are pimping them out and causing this problem, right? And we need to stop human trafficking, but you need to go after those that are causing the problem, not the people there. They can be women, men, whoever it is, can get the counseling and do what's right, and they should when they're done and they've gone through those programs. They need to get their cases dismissed. I represented a young lady many years ago, and she was under the thumb of a pimp, and she had a lot of cases with trespassing and prostitution, and the pimp never got prosecuted until he got busted in another state, and he was prosecuted federally. And then the federal prosecutor needed her to testify against him. But she had so many convictions on her record that it was difficult to have her testify against the person that was holding her down for all these years. And then that prosecutor, after the case was over, and the pimp did get convicted, and she and the prosecutor came back to me and said, Mr. Fumo, can you help us seal her record? Because now she's a mother, and she wants to work, and she wants to be a productive member of society. We've got to stop blaming the victims, because a lot of time they are the victims. And I think we need to go after the human trafficking, but we need to go after the people responsible for the human trafficking. And that's something Mr. Wolfson refuses to do.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. You're talking about prosecuting people who are trafficking.
Yes.
Particularly juveniles, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
But what about people who have made the decision to make sex work, to engage in sex work willingly? What about those folks? Would you be thinking about decriminalizing that kind of sex work?
I've represented teachers. Teachers are underpaid in this community so severely. What we have on food stamps and getting support are billionaires, Sam's Club, Walmart, Amazon. They get all the tax breaks. And who is on food stamps and getting social assistance? Teachers. That's ridiculous. I've had teachers that have to go out on a weekend. I've represented in the past that would use sex work to supplement their income because they're buying food for children in their classes because they don't make enough and their families don't make enough to support themselves.
Mr. Treffinger, what are your thoughts on decriminalizing willing sex work? I'll throw that in there.
I think that there needs to be a distinction. Obviously, I think that the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, that's a plague on our communities. It was a plague when I was in Northern Nevada. It's a plague down here. There are avenues for legal sex work. I think completely decriminalizing it is not necessarily the route to go. Even in countries where they have a much more open system than we do, there are clear regulations and testing and things that make those things safer. I think a broad decriminalization doesn't necessarily protect people in the community, but we definitely need to be looking into the pimps, the sex traffickers, people who are not there willingly. Those people should be treated like victims. I absolutely agree, because they are victims. They didn't choose to go into that life. But we definitely need to prosecute sex trafficking more. I think there are legal avenues to do sex work now in this state already, and people should avail themselves of those if they want to choose to go into that industry.
I know there are some legal avenues in this state, but Clark County is not one of those counties where
Correct.
it is legal. So would you be thinking about making some changes or at least looking at the possibility of that in Clark County should you be elected DA?
Again, that would be a legislature
Sure.
thing.
I should have said, would you support that? Or maybe just when those cases come through your court to be charged, what would you be thinking about there?
If the laws are on the books as they are today, I think I have an obligation to prosecute. However, if they want to change the law, I will support the change in the law. If that's the decision the community makes and the delegates who go to our Senate and our legislature make that change, I will support the change.
Gotcha. Thank you. Next question. This comes from Miss Jasmine Bryan. Hi, Jasmine. Fees for traffic tickets and traffic warrants can be crippling. What accommodations or laws are there currently, and what will you do to work on helping those struggling with these circumstances make it impossible for them? What are your thoughts on second chance programs that would help people get their driver's license back? Mr. Treffinger.
And I think we've covered some of this.
We have covered some of that.
We don't need a debtor's prison in Clark County. We just don't need it. I'm for second chances on driver's licenses and work programs and all those things that can take some of the financial burden off families. And I would even be for getting rid. I know you can do work programs for some of the fees, but not all the fees. I'd be for community service for all the fees if it's going to benefit the community. We have to stop throwing people in jail and taking their driver's license for basic traffic. If they're now reckless driving people, DUI people, different ball game. But if we're talking about basic 5-10 miles and over speeding tickets, people losing their driver's licenses for long periods of time because they can't pay the fine, who is that helping? Because now these people can't get to work, and now we have a bigger problem.
Right. Mr. Fumo?
In 2015, I saw it firsthand. I was a justice court hearing master, and what they had me doing is adjudicating traffic tickets. And what I saw, again, was the disenfranchised, people of color being arrested, taken in, and they're in chains because they couldn't pay a $100 monthly fee, and their fines were doubled. And I had a chart that the Justice Court Chief Judge wanted me to go by, because if you owed $1,000, now we got to double the fee or whatever it is and add these on, or give you 30 days in jail. And I went to them and I said, this is ridiculous. It costs us $200 a day to keep him in jail, and he only owes us $500, and you want to give him 30 days. You're costing the taxpayers money. And so my result was, if someone's in chains, they're out, and their ticket is now dismissed. It's closed, right? Paid in full. You paid your debt. You spent a night in jail. And we had, because it was only a few $100s. And it's costing us as the taxpayers money. And when you can say to somebody, how much money you got in your pocket right now? You owe $500. Can you pay $300 today? Yeah, I got that. Let's close it out with $300. We'll waive that other $200. Because what does it do? It disenfranchises the poor already, and it continues that vicious cycle. That needs to stop. And I'm so glad the legislature did decriminalize the traffic tickets. I just wish that we had the guts and intestinal fortitude to implement it right away rather than waiting a year.
Shout out to Assemblywoman Rochelle Wynn for writing that bill, and to all the legislators before her who made that attempt. Yeah. Next question. This comes from Sean Navarro. Hey, Sean. Thank y'all both for having the courage to be here. To both candidates, how will you handle the cases of the undocumented who face deportation for minor offenses? Mr. Treppinger, let's have you take that first.
It's a tough thing to deal with from a prosecutorial perspective, because sometimes you don't know. People, we have the undocumented, they enter our system and they have a hard time getting out of our system. I think we do need to be a little bit sensitive to those cases. I've had clients who, are in on felony cases, and their biggest concern is, oh my God, do I go to trial and risk, getting deported right afterwards? I think there are ways to fashion plea agreements and ways to stop people from ending up into ICE custody. Not everybody who commits a crime the first time should be deported. It's just not, it's really not the values this country was founded on. We try to give people second chances. We try to involve these communities as much as possible. So I would be sensitive to those issues. I'm not sure the best way to handle it as I sit here today, but it is certainly something that I would look into dealing with once elected into office.
I'm going to let you take that question also, and then I have a question for both of you related to that.
I will treat everybody with dignity and respect, whether you're documented, undocumented, white, black, brown, red, yellow, whatever it is, you're going to be treated with dignity and respect. But if you commit a crime, and it's a violent crime, you will be prosecuted, whether you're law enforcement or whether you're Joe citizen, whether you're documented or undocumented. But what I will not do is use that as a threat to say, you're going to take this deal or else I'm going to have you deported. What I will not do is cooperate with the federal government and say, we got somebody in custody that's going to be, is likely to be deported, you should come pick them up. What I will not do is pile on charges so you stay in custody longer. Because I know if you can get back to your family and you can work, you can become, too, a productive member of society and go through the right channels to be a citizen of this great state and county.
My question related to that was, working with some of the organizations that work directly with undocumented populations. Some of the times, we have a large number of undocumented who are caught up with minor traffic violations, and who are facing deportation because of that. And I'm wondering if you would be, you mentioned earlier that you'd be willing to sit down with community organizations and be in the community and talk to people. Would you be willing to do that as a district attorney, working with some of these organizations that are helping undocumented people who are caught up in this system? And maybe have some kind of, that's just something I'm thinking of off the top of my head. I'll let you answer first.
Absolutely. I'm willing to sit down again with any agency who can help us take some of the burden off of our judicial system and put people in a better position. So I'm always willing to have those conversations.
Okay. Ozzy.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking as you were asking the question, Assemblywoman Selena Torres, Michael Kagan, who is a professor at the law school who runs the immigration clinic. There's people like that I would love to have the opportunity to sit down and work with and listen to and come up with reasonable resolutions to these problems. And so that's what I do. Not just talk to them, I will listen.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. All right. Well, I think we've gone through all of our questions. So I want to thank all of our audience members for participating with us virtually. Thank you for rolling with us with all of the changes. I want to thank our panelists, Mr. Anthony Curry, representing the ACLU, and Mr. Pastor Fabulous Kelsey West, representing the NAACP. And thank you to all of our sponsors, the Clark County Black Caucus, the ACLU of Nevada, Go Urban Las Vegas, and the NAACP. I am going to give each of you an opportunity to give us your closing remarks. I'm going to give each of you 2 minutes. Mr. Fumo, let's start with you.
I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. I'm not afraid of any of you. Mr. Treffinger, appreciate the opportunity and very respectful debate. You know, as I was preparing for this and coming over tonight, I was thinking of LBJ. In 1964, his signature legislation was the Civil Rights Act. And he had a lot of pushback from senators from down south, one of them in particular from Georgia. And he got on the phone, and thank God we have his recordings, because what he said to that man is, Senator, what kind of Christian are you? Are you the kind of man, are you the once a week fella, or you to hold the word of God in your heart? And what kind of politician are you? Are you in it for yourself, or do you really care about the constituents of this great country? And finally, what kind of man are you? Are you a kind of man that has the guts and intestinal fortitude to do what you know is right for every person in this community, or do you just shrivel up and slither away? And so, Clark County, I ask you, what kind of man do you want representing you in Clark County? Do you want someone who's going to stand up and fight for you and treat everybody with dignity and respect and go over those that need to be punished? Or do you want somebody who's going to shrivel up and slither away? My name is Ozzie Fumo. I've been practicing in this great community for the last 26 years. It's my home. I love Clark County. I want to protect the victims of Clark County. I commit to you that I will be transparent. I commit to you that we will end the death penalty. I commit to you that I will work hard to protect every single person. I commit to having victim offender programs, treating victims so that our victims as children don't become next year's defendants. You can go to OzzieFumo.com and learn more about me. I am not afraid of the people in this community. I am having a get-together, a meet and greet at the Italian American Club on April 7th. I hope to see you all there. And I appreciate this opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Treffinger.
Thank you. And again, thank you for inviting me. I'm proud to have the courage to be here as the Republican candidate. It's not always easy walking into these forums, but I showed up. And I think that says something about me that it may not say about someone else in this race, but we've gone over that enough. I'm the conservative in this fight. I think that for a long time we've lost some of the conservative values in the DA's office. But conservative doesn't mean I'm not going to be transparent and hold myself and my staff accountable. That's part of this job. And we're going to bring equality and consistency to the office. Charging decisions are going to make sense. The very, very specialized tools we've talked about, such as the death penalty and no-knock warrants and certifications, are going to be used only in the most extreme cases and where they're warranted and not just loosely thrown around. I'm proud to be in this fight. This is not somewhere I expected to be. I'm not a politician. I'll tell you that from the beginning. 8 months ago, I would never have thought of joining this fight. But when I saw that there wasn't going to be balance, there wasn't going to be a Republican on this side, as there wasn't last time around, I don't believe. There needs to be balance. You need to hear from all sides. You need to vote for the person that goes to your values. If you don't agree with what I'm putting forward, don't vote for me. There's other candidates in this race. But if you are in for conservative values, if you believe in the Constitution, if you want to see real change made at the District Attorney's Office, I'm asking for your vote. My website is Treffinger, and I'm not going to leave you to try to spell it. It's TREFFINGER, the number 4, Nevada.com. Come out and support me. Email me. I do check the emails on there. I'm happy to go with one-on-one and talk to you about any issue we've discussed tonight or any other issue that comes to mind about my campaign. I answer those questions myself. I don't have a big campaign staff. And like I said, if you like my position on things, please come out and vote.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you both again for participating in this robust and very necessary forum. Thank you for telling the people all about you and why you think you are the best candidate for district attorney. And thank you again to all of our viewers for tuning in and participating. Remember, political participation is one of the most important things that you could do for yourself and for your community and for your families. Thank you. You all have a great night. I'm Lisa Mosley. It has been an honor to serve you tonight as your moderator. Thank you for participating. Have a good night.